All right. Okay, so I'm going to read you all John's bio. And John, you sent me an abbreviated one and a long one. I'm going to read the long one because
Okay.
you have such an interesting career. So is everybody ready for us to jump in? Give me a thumbs up if you're ready. All right, great. John, in this class is, they don't do this Zoom thing very often. So this is, we're all getting kind of our sea legs with having class this way today. But okay, let me pull up your bio here. I had it up. All right. Okay, so here we are. Let me make sure because I'm toggling back and forth. I don't want to miss letting anybody into the room. Okay. So John German, and it's German, right, John? I have your last name correct. That's what I thought. Okay. John German joined Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory as Chief Communications Officer in February 2018, where he leads the central team of communications professionals that is projecting the lab's global scientific leadership and promoting an internal culture of shared purpose and values. As Research Communications Director at Arizona State University's Office of the President, and before that as Director of Communications at the world-renowned Santa Fe Institute, he designed and led strategic communications programs that advanced the scientific, cultural, and fiscal priorities of these institutions. Earlier in his career, for nearly 2 decades, he served in a variety of strategic communications roles at Sandia National Laboratories in Albuquerque. During his career, he served as a science writer, employee communicator, spokesperson, emergency communicator, publications editor, technical writer and editor, and freelance journalist. Berkeley Labs is John's 3rd U.S. national lab. While pursuing an undergrad professional writing degree at the University of New Mexico, he spent 2 summers and 1 spring break as a science writing intern at Los Alamos National Laboratories. So John is a super impressive professional communicator, although he wanted to have me clarify or explain to me that he's not a technical writer at the present time. His career demonstrates the kind of the interesting navigation through various main roads and side roads that one can take if you have a background in professional and technical communication. John did come out of our program years ago, I believe, back when, and as TJ Cardella, John, I know you know TJ, she spoke on Monday. She mentioned that she also went through our professional communication program back when we had a degree, an explicit degree in it. And John, I know you know from our board meeting last spring that we have a certificate and a minor at present, and we have a brand new graduate certificate in technical and professional communication. So many of these students are doing the certificate, so they have an interest in technical and professional communication. I told them that my first jobs after getting an English degree were in public relations. And that was a bit of a baptism by fire for me. And then I worked in engineering communication before going to grad school. So everybody, while John is talking, if you can keep your camera on, great. If you want to blank your camera, I can't tell you not to, but I think John would probably prefer seeing actual live heads. But when it's time for question and answer, I hope everybody has something prepared today. We may not have time for everybody to ask a question, but I hope you're ready for that. So John, if you're ready, you can take it away.
Sure. Thank you. And hi, everybody. It's really nice to see you. I do find that in a Zoom environment, especially, it's important for the speaker to be able to see people and read faces. So if you're willing and able to keep your camera on, that would be super. Also, if I just have some informal discussion points, not a super formal presentation. So if you have a question, just stick your hand up. You can use the stick your hand up button, or you can actually put your hand up, and I'll stop talking. Anyway, it's really good to see you. What's probably not totally apparent from my bio is that this journey of mine began with English 220, quite literally. I had always been a good writer. My father was a physicist. And so growing up, every day was a science lesson, and I was always interested in science and fascinated by it. He was also a great science teacher. He taught at the Air Force Academy and other places. And so I was fascinated in the idea of transferring scientific knowledge and enthusiasm to others. And always was a decent writer, had a great journalism teacher in high school. But I didn't know what I wanted to do with that until English 220. And that really put me on the path towards a professional writing degree at UNM, internship at Los Alamos. I never really wanted to be a scientist per se, but I liked the idea of science communication. And so it really was a transformative English 220. And later in my discussion, I'll sort of give you what I think are some of the core concepts from 220 that were so important, that have been so important in my career, that I use almost every day. I think the bio covers it. I've kind of been in and around the national lab system for most of my career. I've also had some time in the university system. The Santa Fe Institute is obviously a fascinating place. But what's not noted in it, I think, is I also did some freelance journalism along the way, kind of as a side gig, and also did some contract technical writing and editing along the way at various points in my career. So I do have that skill set, and I have used it many times. So it's an extremely valuable set of skills. Let's see. I wanted to just explain to you what I do. So I'm a chief communication officer at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. We have a team of about 20 people who come from all different fields of communication and contribute in many ways to the laboratory's mission. And I'm just going to, if it's okay, quickly share a slide here, kind of give you a sense of what we do. We are the, host disabled participant screen sharing.
It should be set now if you try
Okay,
again.
thanks. Yeah, let me try. Okay, there it is. Thanks. I won't share too many slides, but over here on the left is everything we do at the laboratory. Our chief responsibilities in the central office. I report directly to the lab director. He's my boss. And we align everything we do. In fact, this is our mission statement for our department, which means that everything we do is aligned with the strategic intent of the laboratory. So again, here's everything we do. It's quite a lot. We manage, the website content. We do all the multimedia and videography. We run several campaigns and special projects. An example of that, when the Oppenheimer movie came out last summer, our lab obviously had a very close connection to Oppenheimer. And in fact, Josh Hartnett played the character who is the namesake for our laboratory, E.O. Lawrence. So we were, interested to see public interest in that story and telling that story. And so we jumped on that, made sure that people knew our connection to the history. We do all the science news, all the media relations, all the social media for the laboratory, all the internal communications. We have a workforce of about 8,000 people. So it's fairly large and complex organization. When bad things happen, they do happen, we manage crisis and emergency communications. We also make sure our executives are prepared for high profile presentations and conversations, and make sure they're on message and most importantly, consistent with each other. And so that's just a quick overview of what we do. A typical day is there's a lot of email and a lot of meetings. I work as the chief communication officer and the senior leader for communications at the laboratory. I work through the team, and I work through other teams around the laboratory that are doing communications. And so my job is to make sure people have the tools they need, that someone's helping them troubleshoot problems, build relationships, serve as a liaison to senior leadership. And then, most importantly, keeping up with the field of communications, which I have to say is one of the fast-moving, fast-changing, fastest-moving fields there are. I mean, there are no faster-moving fields. I mean, AI is about to transform everything we do. And I date myself here, but I think AI is going to be the third major transition in our field that I've experienced. I've been doing this since before the advent of the internet, which obviously completely upended communications. And then of course I have witnessed social media, the emergence of social media as a major tool for communication. So I think AI is going to be kind of a third major transition that I will witness myself. And it's interesting times. If you're interested later in the Q&A, I can talk about other ways communication has changed and evolved over the decades. I think suffice to say that we serve today as advisors to senior leadership, consultants to the organization, and we are integral in making sure that the laboratory is meeting its mission space. So it's a really great place to be. Let's see. When I say keeping up with the field, I scan several professional journals and articles every day. I get daily emails from various professional societies. I make sure my team sees those that are relevant and important for professional development. So I make sure we're kind of at the cutting edge of our field all the time. Let's see. The backgrounds of some of the people I work with, it's a really diverse field. Obviously, our core is science communication, which is its own subfield within communications. The UNM I don't know if there's still a course in science communications at UNM, but we used to have a specific course, which was also transformative for me. But I've got people who are former PhD scientists on my team who wanted to communicate, decided they didn't want to be scientists anymore, but they wanted to be communicators. I've got former journalists on my team, several of them. I've got several corporate communicators that come from various fields, AT&T, The Gap, Muscle Milk. Our social media specialist had a long career at Muscle Milk before she came to Berkeley Lab. So you don't have to be a science professional to do communications. It doesn't hurt, but certainly, the person we have that worked for The Gap was an internal communication and employee engagement specialist there. That's a really important skill these days because of our hybrid work environment. We have people who are remote, we have people who are teleworking, we have people who are on site. We have to engage all of them, no matter what their work situation is. I've got people on my team who work for nonprofits or fundraising, philanthropy. I've got one person who worked for a PR agency. I've got internal and employee communication specialists. I've got one person who worked political campaigns and worked for elected officials, the mayor of Miami in particular. And I've got an Emmy award-winning videographer and a couple of web digital specialists. So it's a really fascinating team. So I think I sort of covered some of the subfields, but science communications, journalism, media relations, public relations, employee comms, executive comms, crisis and emergency communications, digital web communications, multimedia, video, animation, illustration, and campaigns are all part of what we do. It's a long list, and we're only 19 people or 20 people, so we have pretty busy days, and often we're half the time we're reacting to things happening in the world, and the other part of the time we're planning and getting ready for tomorrow or the next day. So that's a really exciting career. Let's see. Julianne asked me to cover some of the STC competencies and how they apply to our work. So obviously, project planning and analysis. I mean, we are constantly thinking about campaigns and planning and pulling teams together with the right specializations. My team is a very flexible team in that we all sort of have one or two superpowers within communications. And so when we're getting ready to run a campaign, we pull together the right people with the right superpowers to pull that off. We also, communication planning is its own specialty, and we need to these days not only put things out into the world. As a couple of tweets about E.O. Lawrence and Oppenheimer, that's interesting, but does it move the needle? Does it help the laboratory in some way? What is the strategic intent of the campaign? So we do spend a lot of time asking ourselves, what are we trying to accomplish with this campaign? What do we want to have happen? Who do we want to know about this material? And what do we want them to do? And so I spend a lot of my time talking to my team about not spending our time on activities, but what are the outcomes we want to achieve. And that requires data, it requires planning and analysis, audience analysis especially. But we actually try to quantify in many cases the outcomes that we would like to have. We'd like this much engagement on social media. We'd like to reach these particular audiences. We'd like this influencer to retweet us. And so, we really think about how are we going to know we were successful or not successful before we start a campaign. Content development, obviously, that we spend most of our time, 80% of our time developing content. Organizational design, not really sure. Maybe Julianne, you can help me understand what that means. I can pause here because I'm doing a lot of talking. Can you help me understand that one?
So, I mean, there are the ways that it is interpreted by the STC. And interestingly, one of the people who developed these competencies, which were, the goal was to have a framework for an exam, like a practitioner-based exam. There's a lower level, a middle level, and a high level. And the person who was at the head of that initiative was Craig Baer, and he got his PhD at UNM in TechCom. So when I use organizational design, I mean, how do we organize, like, how do we design information in an organized fashion? That can be visual information, textual information. But I always am telling my students that the simple thumbnail for this is a wall of text isn't going to do it. So it can be the design of documents themselves, or like in the genre of documentation, but it can also be how do we organize the processes of our workflow. So I think it can work in a few different ways of understanding it, but that's how I typically use it.
That's perfect. Okay, so actually I have a great example here I just want to share. We recently did a 3-year website design. It's the first time we redesigned our website and rebranded the laboratory since, and I'm not kidding you, since the beginning of the internet. The laboratory had managed its web properties as 11 or 15 separate fiefdoms prior to my arrival. And before I came to the laboratory, I looked at that and I said, maybe I don't want this job. This is a sign of a deep dysfunction. But I ended up taking the job, and we ended up doing the web redesign and the rebranding of the laboratory as part of it. And I'm glad I did. We actually were a finalist for a Webby Award, which is the sort of the Oscars of the internet. And that doesn't happen for a government laboratory very often, I can tell you. Let me just share with you. This is our current homepage. But in the context of organizational development or design, this is very, very well thought out. We want to lead with impact. So we have 3 really strong science stories, and these rotate out a couple times a week up here. But also, we spend a lot of time. What do our audiences want to know? They want to know what science we do, and why should they care? So we organize it into discovery science, clean energy, and a healthy planet. They also want to know what is the organization of the institution. So we try to tell them that there. We also wanted our people to be, really apparent. We wanted lots of, why do people come to Berkeley Lab? It's the people that they're going to work for. And then also, if you wanted to engage with us, how would you do that? And so we very carefully designed these user pathways to make sure that someone who comes to our site can find what they're looking for and figure out how exactly, given their situation, how should they engage with us? So it's a really carefully thought out. After impact, this is our mission statement and kind of what we are as a laboratory. And I wanted smiling faces, and especially, the diversity of the laboratory to come through. And so, we rotate these out about once a month, features of different people that work at the laboratory. And then we end with more impact. I will just quickly go to our news center, which is where we spend most of our time. But we have we have some great video. We have a great video series here. If you have some time to poke around, check it out. We do a podcast, which is really a great way to cover some really big topics in science. our social media, our media coverage. We haven't added our animations here yet, but we're working on that. We have a whole series of here's an example of an animation that we do. So if you have some time to poke around, I think I'm really proud of what we've done with our web organization. And it's one way we organize information very carefully to reach our audiences. Written communication, I'm back to the competencies now. Visual communication, I think we covered that. Reviewing and editing, of course, when we send something out in the world, we want it to be of the highest quality. And so we spend a lot of time making sure that we're representing ourselves well. Content management, I think we covered that with the website. Production and delivery, we information in many ways. We have newsletters, we have a daily employee newsletter, we have website, we use social media to deliver things to our audiences. And then we communicate with people directly. This is we communicate to people through the news media, but I think more and more that direct connection with people is really important. That we know who our audiences are and we're directly speaking to them. Okay, so I think I covered the competencies. Unless you have any questions, I can pause here. Are there any questions?
I just wanted to say about the science writing course, it's kind of been smushed together with two other communication approaches. It's scientific, environmental, and medical communication. And I teach it I'm teaching it at the grad level right now, and we do offer it at the undergraduate level, although it hasn't been offered in quite some time. And I find it a little unwieldy to try to teach those three things, even though there's a lot of bleed over between them. If there was an explicit scientific communication one that, might be easier pedagogically. But before, if John has anything more to add, which I think he will, but we can take a pause for a few questions if he said anything that inspired any of you to ask your question now. Okay, we have B with her hand up. Go for it, B. Unmute and go for it.
Hi. So working specifically in the science field, how would you say that is unique compared to other technical writing fields? Like, what is it in your day-to-day environment that kind of sets you apart from other technical communication?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it sets us apart from other kinds of technical communication, but it is an additional layer, an additional skill set. There's a lot of journalism that underlies it. You're taking a complex topic and you're making it simple and interesting. You're using similes and metaphors. You're really trying to engage the audience in the science. A lot of science is sort of obscure and obtuse and hard to understand and reach. And we want to make that science relevant to the person who's reading it. And so that is a skill set that can be taught, but it's also a skill set that you learn over time and you get better at. And so, there are many ways to make science relevant and interesting and compelling. I personally, I think science is fascinating and it is the answer to most of our problems on the planet. So I think that, it's really important that we have people doing this well.
So there's a lot of creativity in what you're doing. So it's taking that kind of creative writing aspect of it and applying it to the scientific world. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's part of it. But I think the other part is, our brains are wired for storytelling.
Right.
And there's a lot of storytelling technique in science communication. You don't just dive in and say, try to explain a complex topic. You want to bring people into the story. Let me give you a quick example. A couple of years ago, we wanted to tell a story to the world that we at Berkeley Lab have a shop where we build detectors that go into the world's most advanced particle accelerators. That's not particularly exciting or relevant to most people. But the way we told the story is we learned that we have two graduate students, both women, whose job it was to take these detectors. They're about 3 feet long, and they have their own carrying case with strap and everything, and it literally take them from Berkeley, California, on an airplane and deliver them to CERN in Switzerland, and do it very carefully because they're sensitive and you don't want to break them. They have to actually buy a plane seat for the detector and accompany it in person, and have special letters and everything to get through security and all this. So we told this story and we called it Detectors on a Plane. And it was one of our most popular stories. And so, the idea that we build the detectors that make CERN possible is not on its face very interesting. But the fact that we have someone deliver it, a young person who builds this detector, and then they get to sort of deliver it to CERN and install it and make sure it works, was a good story. It's storytelling. It's not, it's not just science.
Thank you, John. That's super important. We have 2 other questions, but I just want to say, what I always hear from tech writers and professional communicators who visit my classes is how much creative problem solving they have to use. I mean, you know what you want to communicate and you know who you need to communicate it to, which is your audience, which is optimally important. But how you get from here to here is where the creativity comes into play. But let's go with Jan and then Alma. So unmute yourself, Jan, and then go for it.
Thank you. John, I have 2 questions. Kind of follow up on the topic of about ethics. So when you communicate in the way that you do for the laboratory, what are some ethical concerns that you consider?
It's a great question. So first of all, a lot of people have difficulty with the field of public relations because, at the bottom of that, it is I think people think of PR as a manipulation to sell a product. So I think some people have issues with PR. I'm thankful that science doesn't need necessarily that manipulation. We're not selling a product. We want what at the base of my responsibility is to make sure the taxpaying public knows what we're doing with $1.5 billion of funding that goes to Berkeley Lab and the other 16 national labs. So, I think there's an ethical responsibility to engage the public in what we're doing, because these are resources that could be used in other ways. Frankly, we have a lot of challenges in our society, and science is not feeding people directly. It is it is doing something for the long-term good of our society. That's sometimes a hard story to tell. When there are people who are hungry, or people who are homeless, or people who, there are many things we could do with the funding. Ultimately, I'm getting a little bit off track here. Ultimately, science is like something like 1.2% of the GDP. So it's, the United States is not making a huge investment in science, even though it seems like a lot of money. So to tell that story in a credible way that is not manipulative is, to me, really important. And I think it aligns well with the mission of science, which is to find objective truth. So there's a culture within science communication that is about objective truth. And so I think that's that's one facet of the answer about ethics. Obviously, we have a lot of ethical issues that we have to deal with, that are more direct, like how do we make sure women are represented in science at the corresponding rate of their role in science. For example, we just had an interesting presentation in our staff meeting today about I think 22% of scientists in the United States are women, and yet only 11% of the authors of scientific papers are women. So why is there that gap? And what can we do about it? How can we tell a story about science that's more diverse? One thing we deal with directly is when we do tell stories about science, the traditional way is to interview the principal investigator, the senior scientist on the paper, on the research project. That doesn't work for us because that's almost always a senior scientist who's a middle-aged or late career male these days. We try to tell the story from the perspective of the grad students who are working on the research, or the more diverse group of contributors to the research, so that we're not stuck in that trap of only telling the story through the perspective of the PI. Obviously the PI is in the story, but we want to tell the story from other angles as well. And so that's another example of ethics. We have 8,000 people in our workforce. When you have that many people are doing bad things. People are making bad choices. So we have to deal with those crises and make sure that we're telling our stakeholders at DOE and in Congress when somebody messes up, and being transparent about that, but also what are we going to do about it? How are we going to prevent that from happening again? So there are many ethical considerations in communications. I hope that answers your question. I don't think I could give you a comprehensive answer in the time that we have.
Thank you so much, John. That was a great answer. I do have one follow-up. It's a short one. So you say you've seen some, I guess, some big changes in the field of communication in terms of internet, social media, and now AI. So well, in your experience, how has ethics changed with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problems with AI and ethics are very well known, and they're on our minds. There are biases in any generative AI model, and those have been well publicized. And I know that people working in AI are working on those problems. There's also the issue of copyright and ownership of materials. If you're going to create an image, what images was that AI model trained on? And are you stealing the intellectual property of the creators of that original material when you create an image in AI? That's obviously a well understood, well discussed problem, and I think the people creating the models are working on that problem now. We're not going to at Berkeley Labs solve all the ethical problems with AI, but we can be aware of the proper use of AI. And right now we are being very cautious about using it, while also trying to be on the cutting edge of using it. We don't want to be early adopters to the point where we're making bad choices ethically. But we want to be early adopters because, frankly, it is the future. So we're using it as a creative buddy at this point. We're not using it to draft content. We're not using it to create images, but we're using it for ideas and brainstorming and, kind of behind the scenes stuff.
Thank you,
I hope
John.
that answers your question.
Thanks, John. I know Alma has her hand up, and so just to keep everybody aware of what time it is, we've got about 15 more minutes in class, and I know there's others of you who want to ask questions. And since we are using the modality of Zoom, if you're more comfortable putting your question in the chat, you can also do that. But let's go for it, Alma. Unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, I was wondering what intrigued you to join the field of communication in science.
Yeah, I mean, I think my father being a physicist and such a great science teacher, he would take me to his. He used to teach physics at the Air Force Academy. He would take me to his class when I was, I don't know, 9 or 10 or something, and we'd shoot projectiles across the room and talk about projectile physics, and that was his way of teaching physics to what amounts to undergrads, and that really rubbed off on me, that idea that you can make science engaging and interesting and fun, and so that was sort of the hook. But also, as I said, English 220 and especially science writing undergraduate course, it really hooked me on that, as well as journalism in high school, which I was just really interested in learning more about. So those are sort of the factors, and it turned out to be a really rewarding field.
Thank you, John. if we have time, I would love for you to talk a little bit more about the Santa Fe Institute, because I think that is such a fascinating entity, especially in which to be a communicator. But I want to, if we have time and there's a lull with no questions, but Gabe, you're next. Unmute yourself and go for it.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. Was there ever a point where you, how do I word this? Not doubted your career path, but was there ever a point where you were like, am I going down the right path? And if so, how did you handle that?
I honestly can't say I ever doubted it. I'm one of those few lucky people who knew, pretty much since I was a junior in high school that I wanted to be a writer or a journalist or something. And it just so happened that UNM was able to match me up with my passions. So there was never a moment where it was in doubt. For me, I know other people struggle, and I even my own kids struggle sometimes with knowing what their future is. I don't want to offer any sort of specific advice on that other than, if, there's that old saying, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. That's been true for me.
I think, I mean, you didn't ask me this question, Gabe, but I think I've had these kind of crises. I knew as an English major that I wanted to do something with writing. And I landed in public relations, and I did some executive positioning work, which is interesting, to raise the ethical question of how communicators serve audience and kind of massage information sometimes. But as somebody who teaches technical writing, I've wondered whether I should have actually been working in industry rather than being a pedagogue. So, I think even though I never doubted whether, communication and writing was what I wanted to do, I think you can question which particular trail you're on within that field. And so, John, you've probably had these opportunities come to you because you've switched the places you've worked. So while you've been in the field of communication and various, iterations, you've changed tracks, as it were. How did that come to be? If I can just follow up with that question. And then Alma, you can lower your hand and then we can maybe get a few more questions in. So think about it while John's answering this little question of mine.
Yeah, so the great thing about the field of communication is there are so many subfields and manifestations of it. So, with the core skills in communications, you can do so many things and there's so much variety. When I started at Sandia, I was an internal communications specialist. I wrote stories for the internal lab newspaper, which was literally on paper, came out every 2 weeks back in the day. And from that, I started writing science stories. And from that, one day, my boss asked me, "Hey, John, I really want you to take over the empty spot leading the media relations team." And I said, "But I don't want to do that." And he said, "Well, I think you should." And I said, "But I don't want to do that." And he said, "But you really should." And that led me to, so I did it. I didn't enjoy it at first, but I learned to enjoy it. But that led me to go, well, gee, I can now do executive communication. I can run campaigns. I can develop a national media strategy. And so that led me to just sort of expand and say to myself, I want to do everything there is to do in communications. And so I did. Over the 20 years at Sandia, I basically did everything there is to do under the sun. And that is what led me to a leadership role. Because I do have deep experience in all of the different subfields of communications, I can now confidently lead, the people that do work in all those fields. And at some point along the way, I got the leadership bug, and leadership is an entirely different field of study from communications. Somewhere along the way, I just decided, hey, this is really cool. I like this. I want to lead people, and I want to get good at it. And am I good at it today? I don't know, but I work every day to be a better leader. So it's a journey that lasts forever. I hope I answered your question.
Yes. And so let's have 2 more questions and then we'll thank John and be on our way. 2 more questions, folks.
I've got one more thing I wanted to say that I think is really important, if that's okay. So maybe I can ask myself my own question. Okay, I see there is a question. Real quick, let me just say, English 220, as I said before, is formative to me, and for a couple of reasons. One is that's where we really, at that time at least, got into heavy duty audience analysis. You know, I don't know if that's still sort of the core of it. Everything begins with audience analysis and communications. Everything. You have to understand who you're talking to and what they need, or you're not communicating. And so, you know, that is a core skill that has served me well every single day of my 35-year career. The second thing I will say is organizing information so it is useful and effective for the reader audience, whatever you call them. You know, not only does organizing information make you more effective as a communicator, but it also requires you to think clearly about what you're trying to say and why. And so that is a core skill that, again, I've used every single day of my 35-year career. For me, those are the sort of foundational skills in communications that will serve you well forever if you choose to go into communication. That's what I wanted to say. I just wanted to point out, I think, you know, may seem like a small thing now, but it's important.
Thank you, John. Okay, and Michael has a question. Michael, go for it.
Yes, hi. So I was just curious because given that, you know, post-pandemic, a lot of workplaces have kind of transitioned to remote or hybrid work. Do you or a lot of people on your team work remotely? And has that kind of changed the way that your workflow goes on the day-to-day?
Great question. So I am currently sitting in Rio Rancho, where I have a home. I have someone in Santa Fe, I have someone in Los Angeles, I have someone in Portland. So yeah, we have several people who are remote, and we find that we can do our jobs. It's not true for every job, but I think many of our jobs are remote and able to be done remotely. I do have some positions that are required to be on site. For example, media relations, like you can't host a media visit unless you have somebody there to host it. And so it really just varies with the position. Most of our internal communications team, about 3 or 4 people, they need to be able to be on site because, you know, you can't replace that interacting with people and understanding the challenges that they have. You can't just do that remotely. But our science writing team is mostly remote, and so we have a variety. The other side of the coin is our responsibility is to make sure employees feel engaged with the institution. And that's much harder today than it was 4 or 5 years ago. In some ways we deal with that. We try to have on-site events. My own team has a quarterly, I call it an on-site retreat every quarter. We're having one in a week and a half. So everybody who's remote flies in, and we have a couple of days of activities, and we go, you know, have social hour after work, and we just get to know each other. But we do that on sort of a lab-wide scale too. We have on-site events and days where we try to get everybody on site, you know. And the other thing we do as communicators is emphasize the spoken word, the video and audio, and so that people are actually hearing other human beings speak and seeing other human beings talk to them, with them. So town halls, you know, lots of lunch and learns, you know, on Zoom. We do a podcast, we do a lot of audio. We're actually starting up an employee podcast in a couple of weeks here. So that it'll be a weekly radio show, more or less, where we have interviews with people around the laboratory. So this sort of human touch is really more important, I think, than it was. The written word just sucks all the life out of, you know, a lot of sort of personable communication. And so we try to replace that with, you know, hearing and seeing people.
Thank you, John. And I think we're gonna, because we have 4 minutes, I think we'll end there, but I do want to just make a few announcements to everybody. First thing is we're gonna thank John. Everybody give John a round of applause. Thank you so much for coming. And And audience analysis is still crucial to what we do in this class. I love teaching this class, and one of my favorite components of it is when we get all these visits from practitioners. So we have one more to come, which is on Friday, and that's from a recently graduated master's student, Danielle Stevens, who's been working as a tech writer for the government. Currently, she works for the National Park Service for 20 years. So everybody, if you have not yet asked a question of one of our practitioners, Friday is when you need to do it. So be prepared. That one is also on Zoom. So if you just want to ask your question in the chat, be prepared to do it then. And then next week we continue with this project, but this is a relatively short time window on this practitioner information session assignment. So if you have any questions for me as you're starting to build the assignment, please let me know. And I'm starting to submit to Canvas the grades for your group assignment. That had so many features, it was a bit hard. It takes time to pull them all together, but I think that's the only outstanding grading thing out there. Some of you have received grades for that at this point. I was having trouble uploading the rubric to Canvas, so I've emailed it to people who I had trouble with. When I create those Excel spreadsheets for you, open them and read them, whether they're in Canvas or whether you get it via email, because at the bottom, I have all kinds of comments for you about your work. It's kind of a waste of effort on my part if you never even open the file. So please, it's part of the teaching experience is for me to give you feedback on your written output. So, all right, on that note, thank you so much, John. You'll be hearing from me about the IAAT, the Industry and Academic Advisory Team, when our next meeting will be this spring via Zoom. So everybody, I'll see you Friday, same place, same time for our last practitioner visit. Thanks, John. Bye, everybody.